Okay, so I know the theory I'm about to present is a little, it's odd. There's a lot of problems with it, not to mention that it just sounds ludicrous. But just keep with me, and maybe by the end of this video, I'll have you convinced that Freddy Krueger is Jason Voorhees' father. Now, I'm going to start out with one of the more obvious and the more supporting facts behind this. So you might believe me in the beginning, and that makes it to where I don't just hit you with a bunch of really far-fetched theories that make you click off the video. So let's get to it, and I'll show you my strongest theory as to why Freddy Krueger is Jason Voorhees' father. Now, if you remember in Freddy vs. Jason, there's a scene at the end where Freddy Krueger torments Jason inside his mind as they drive to Camp Crystal Lake, where Jason will be the strongest. So, how does this happen? Freddy Krueger can only leave Elm Street if his own child is taking him out, as presented in Freddy's Dead, which Freddy vs. Jason gloriously references in the beginning of the movie. Now, if they are accepting the lore of the past movies, then you have to guess that they are also using it in the new one. So in Freddy vs. Jason, let's just assume that it's not a big plot hole that the retarded director ignored. But let's use it as the director and screenwriters were telling us something we just didn't recognize. And that is that Jason Voorhees was his son, Freddy Krueger's, and that's the reason why, in Jason's mind, he was able to transport Freddy Krueger from Elm Street into the rest of the world. Or in other words, break free of the Elm Street and get into Camp Crystal Lake. Now, once they're there, Freddy Krueger attempts to kill Jason Voorhees in his dream, which he fails. Now, that's the end of my first reasoning. So, let's get to the next one. In Jason Lives, the sixth Friday the 13th movie, there's a scene where a little girl wakes up from her dream screaming. Now, this girl is asked her name, and she replies, Nancy. Now, for any of those watching the movie, it might just seem like a nice nod to A Nightmare on Elm Street. But when you look closer at what happened, you see that it's not just a nod, but the first crossover between A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. She says that she had a nightmare where a man was everywhere and trying to get her. Not just a man, but a monster. Now, this monster could be easily referenced or concluded to be Freddy Krueger, and this could be one of the earliest stages of Freddy Krueger torturing Nancy. Now, that would mean that Freddy Krueger had been to Camp Crystal Lake and is currently inside Nancy's head. Now, this also brings up a few more questions. If so, that means that Nightmare on Elm Street took place a long time before even the first Friday the 13th. Or at least Freddy Krueger died during the first Friday the 13th, and the first Nightmare on Elm Street, even though coming out at the same time as the first Friday the 13th, took place long after it. Now, while this is a far-fetched theory, it wouldn't be that hard to believe, since movies can take place in different timelines, and I'm not so sure they ever clarify the timeline in the first Nightmare film. So, let's go with it. A young Nancy is being plagued by dreams at a Camp Crystal Lake as she tries to escape her traumatic past as being tortured by a evil, alive, not yet dead Krueger. Now, after being burned alive, Krueger attacks Nancy through her dreams at a simple camp, where he is still weak and not strong enough to kill her. So, if this is true, that means that Nightmare on Elm Street the killing of Freddy Krueger took place before the first Friday the 13th, and that means that decades before, Freddy Krueger was a man, which means he could have been around during Jason's youth or before, which means he could have impregnated his mother and split. Now, this is also all very convincing, especially since the Nancy girl could not have been referencing Jason because she hadn't seen him yet. It was later in the movie that she sees Jason, and there is no hint whatsoever that she even knew about him before her dream. Now, I'm going to get to probably one of another very convincing part of my argument, and that is the original Friday the 13th. As I said, if you line up certain timelines at the right place, this theory could make sense. And none better than the fact that if I'm right, and Freddy Krueger could have been the father of Jason, then, well, this would help it very much. Before Freddy Krueger becoming a child killer, it is never clarified what he did. Now, it's also never clarified exactly what he was doing when he killed the children. In the remake, he was a janitor or custodian, but in the originals, they never say exactly what he was. Now, well, this leaves it open for interpretation, as in, before going to Springwood with his wife, because the originals say he had a wife, he could have gone to various places, including Camp Crystal Lake. Now, as we all know, he's an extremely terrible person and a sexual deviant. He probably would have, or could have, had an affair on his wife, which would have resulted in Jason Voorhees. Not to mention the fact that Jason Voorhees keeps coming back to life after death. Now, the first time in the first movie where they say he drowned, they kind of make it to where he comes back to life. Not really. Not really. Because it's more like he didn't really drown, but he survived. And his mother was just angry that they allowed him to go out there, and to her knowledge, he was still drowned. But in reality, the sequel said that he survived. God knows how. But anyhow, after that, he specifically dies with no chance of surviving it multiple times, from the third, fourth, and fifth film. How does he come back? That's simple. His father is in the dream realm, or hell, and he himself being brought back probably has the power to bring back Jason. Now, even though Freddy Krueger is a terrible person, he still has that bit of sympathy left in him for his son, Jason Voorhees. And the reason Jason can keep on coming back is because Freddy Krueger keeps on bringing him back. And how he can do this is, again, he can go out of Elm Street and into Jason Voorhees, and therefore, like he was brought back from being burned to death, brings back Jason Voorhees. Now, from my arguments is stating that how Freddy got out of Elm Street and FBJ, the Nancy cameo in Jason Lives, and the timeline mentioning how Freddy could have done this, to how Jason comes back to life. I find it all very interesting. And I'll go over it quickly one more time just for anybody who missed it. In Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy Krueger got out of Elm Street by going into Jason's mind, something he can only do with his own spawn. Now, in Jason Lives, Nancy is shown waking up from a nightmare as a little girl, and looks exactly like Nancy as a little girl from the original Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, with blonde hair, the little white dress, down to the face. It's the same. She wakes up claiming she had a nightmare about Freddy Krueger, and then Jason is shown, killing people throughout the movie, implying that Freddy Krueger is in Camp Crystal Lake. Now, the other argument was that if this is true, that means that Freddy Krueger could have been alive long before Jason was born, and that would imply that he had opportunity to impregnate Mrs. Voorhees. And finally, my final argument was stating Jason can keep coming back from the dead because Freddy Krueger allows him to, or enables him to. As a father, the last act he can do, or at least the only act he can do as a father, to make up for being such a terrible one, is bringing Jason back. Now, when you look at it, this makes a lot of sense, because he can go through his own son's mind, as he did in Freddy's Dead, his own daughter's mind in Freddy's Dead, but still, he went through his daughter's mind, and he could do stuff, he had powers. And he does this with Jason, thus bringing him back to life every time he dies. Now, there are problems with my hypothesis, though there are extremely well done, parts of it, to where if you analyze it, you could see that there's a very good chance this could be incorporated into any franchise or movie. Though it will never happen. It will never happen because The original Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th franchise ended with Freddy vs. Jason. They were rebooted in 2009 and 2010, and since then only remakes have been confirmed of the remakes. So, what do you think of my theory? Do you think Freddy could be Jason's father, or do you think this is just some crackpot hypothesis I made up while watching Jason Lives? Like and subscribe and comment in the comment section what you think of my theory and who Jason's father could be.